If you still believe that white-haired old man on television, constantly talking about the future of humanity and vaccines saving the world, is some kind of saintly philanthropist with divine status, then you are far too easy to fool. The so-called Epstein Files have acted like a scalpel, slicing straight through the elaborate disguise of this tech icon. When the halo and the scandal sit at the same table, what we see is not the fall of a genius, but the absurdity and hypocrisy of an entire era of idol worship. Today, we are going to drag this man, who has stood on his pedestal for 40 years without falling, back down to earth. We are going to see exactly how much blood money he has consumed in this elite game of privilege. Buckle up. This is not another gossip summary. This is a targeted demolition of the saint statue inside your head. Chapter 1. The Myth Machine. A 40-year crash course in manufacturing the perfect icon. Let us start by dismantling exactly how the saintly persona of Bill Gates was constructed. The version you have heard goes something like this. A Harvard dropout, fueled by raw genius and a passion for computers, wrote world-changing code in a garage, built Microsoft into an empire, became the richest man in the world, and then, having seen it all, dedicated himself alongside his wife to saving humanity through charity. What a beautiful story. The media has made a fortune off this narrative for decades, and Gates has used it to guarantee his own safety for just as long. But let us rewind to the 1970s and see what really happened. There is a detail in Gates's early story that the media has deliberately softened. When he wrote that genius basic interpreter for the Altair computer, he delivered it without ever having access to the Altair hardware. In other words, he sold something that did not yet exist. You can call that vision. You can also call it selling vaporware. But that is not even the worst part. What truly laid the foundation for the Microsoft empire was the now infamous licensing model for its operating system. Microsoft did not actually invent any groundbreaking technology. They bought QDOS, rebranded it as MS-DOS, and then made the most ruthless decision in business history. They refused to sell the system outright. Instead, they charged a licensing fee for every single copy of the operating system installed on every single computer. At the time, this model was almost unheard of. Hardware manufacturers hated it, but they had no choice because IBM was already locked in. And Gates's tactics went even further. He used his partnership agreement with IBM to secretly sell licenses for the operating system to IBM's competitors, companies like Compaq and Dell. By the time IBM realized it had raised a child that would eventually devour it, it was far too late. This is the business mind of the so-called Harvard dropout. It is not genius. It is ruthlessness. The media loves to show those shots of a young Gates, a shy smile, a white turtleneck, eyes sparkling with the pure desire to change the world. Do not be fooled. That shy young man cursed his opponents with the filthiest language at the bargaining table. He used threats of piracy to strangle every potential competitor. When Netscape's browser threatened Microsoft's monopoly, what did Gates do? He ruthlessly bundled Internet Explorer into Windows, gave it away for free, and drove Netscape out of business. This behavior was later found by a court to be monopolistic. This was not the triumph of innovation. This was a giant using its sheer weight to crush every other living creature that still dared to breathe. Do you think he is a genius entrepreneur or a predatory capitalist who built his empire on stolen ideas? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I want to see how many of you are still completely fooled by that garage myth. Chapter 2. The charity version of CUDA. He does not just control your computer anymore. If in the Microsoft era Gates used an operating system to lock in your computer, in his charity era, he has found another way to try to lock in the fate of all humanity. The logic is almost identical to how he used CUDA to lock in developers worldwide. Only this time, what he is locking in is global public health policy. The Gates Foundation controls a trust fund of over $50 billion. It is the largest private charitable foundation in the world. When you have that kind of financial power, you are not just donating money. You are setting the agenda. What is that like? Imagine standing in a field full of starving people, holding the only bag of food. You can say, "I am here to help." But you also have the absolute power to decide who eats, who starves, and by what method. That is exactly how the Gates Foundation operates. Its funding rarely comes with no strings attached. Instead, it comes with extremely detailed conditions. Recipient institutions must adopt solutions approved by the foundation. They must use metrics specified by the foundation. Their strategies must align with the foundation's global plans. In other words, if you take my money, your research direction, your life-saving plan, and even the conclusions of your published papers must all stay within my framework. This is no longer charity. This is a private institution leveraging its immense wealth to shape public policy, decisions that should be made by sovereign nations and through democratic processes. No one denies that their investments in the vaccine alliance, in polio eradication, and in malaria research have had positive effects. But the question has never been whether the money is useful. The question is who gets to use that money to make decisions on whose behalf. When an unelected billionaire, a former world's richest man, makes decisions that affect the lives of hundreds of millions of the world's poorest people, there is no political oversight or accountability mechanism. How do you know his solutions are the best? How can you be sure he is not treating humanity as one giant experiment? You think he is doing charity. In reality, he is using his wealth and geopolitical influence to write a 1,000-page operating system for global health, trying to force the entire world to run on his software. This is a carbon copy of his business monopoly. If you think he is not just doing good deeds, but also pursuing some kind of power that goes far beyond charity, hit the like button and let me know. Let me see how many of you have already started waking up from your worship. Chapter 3. The Epstein Files. Ripping apart the carefully stitched charitable robe. Now we come to the darkest part. Without the name Jeffrey Epstein, perhaps Gates's saintly disguise could have held up for a few more years. But the gradual release of those files has brought this carefully maintained persona crashing down completely. First, let us remember who Jeffrey Epstein was. A convicted felon. A financier who ran one of the most sophisticated and hidden sex trafficking networks in the world. A monster who, according to court documents and victim testimony, systematically sexually exploited underage girls. Any normal, respectable public figure would have done everything possible to distance themselves from him. Draw a clear line. But Bill Gates did not. The files show that Gates's interactions with Epstein went far beyond a single polite meeting. They met multiple times at dinners, private gatherings, and even on flights. Why would a philanthropist, one who claims to have dedicated his life to protecting human health and well-being, maintain such frequent contact with his polar opposite, a man who systematically destroyed the lives of young people? It gets even more disturbing. Leaked emails suggest that Gates once sought Epstein's advice on how to handle certain personal crises in his own life. Imagine this scene. A world-class philanthropist asking a pimp for advice on his life and his marriage. This is not just a lapse in judgment. This is a blatant display of tribal privilege. In Epstein's world, he was not just a criminal. He was a hub, providing special services to the world's richest and most powerful people, including politicians, billionaires, and academics. Gates appears in Epstein's contacts not because of some foundation project, but because the very nature of that social circle was an underground market where money and power could be exchanged for various resources, including women, including minors. When these scandals began to surface, what did Gates and his public relations team do? They did what all elites do at such moments. They stayed silent. They denied. They downplayed. And then they used their friendly media outlets to release carefully crafted excuses, calling it all just a lapse in judgment. He even tried to use his deep influence in the medical world to double down on his vaccine savior image, trying to wash away the evil with a larger dose of good. This tactic is so familiar. Use an even more powerful and legitimate form of power to cover up a shameful secret. This is not the character of a philanthropist. This is the calculation of a politician. There is even more explosive evidence coming, revealing how he manipulated the media to make these scandals simply disappear from the newspapers. I strongly suggest you read until the very end. Do not think this is just a moral failing. Behind this lies an entire privileged class trying to place itself above the law. Chapter 4. The Truth About the Marriage. When differences in values becomes the most elegant lie. Now let us talk about the divorce. In May 2021, Bill and Melinda Gates announced the end of their 27-year marriage, citing their inability to continue to grow together. What an elegant, what a respectable piece of public relations language. If you believe their official statement, then you have fallen for yet another extremely sophisticated media manipulation. Divorces do not happen overnight. The seeds of this one were planted when those Epstein-related emails were exposed. As early as 2019, the New York Times reported that Melinda was furious about Gates's association with Epstein, and that this fury went back to at least 2013. She had explicitly warned Gates not to have anything to do with that man. But Gates clearly did not listen. For a man who had lived his entire life on a cloud, accustomed to everyone around him deferring to his every word, his wife's concerns were probably just an overreaction. This is the most revealing part. When a man repeatedly ignores his partner's basic regarding public decency, when he becomes so filled with himself that he thinks he can fraternize with the world's most notorious villain, that marriage has already died on the inside. Melinda Gates is not some tragic abandoned housewife. She is a trained lawyer and a savvy operator who played a key role inside the foundation for 2 decades. She knows better than anyone that being tied to Bill Gates meant being constantly at risk of being burned by the fire of scandal that was already spreading. Choosing divorce was her act of self-preservation. It was her final line of defense for her own reputation and her own assets. So do not listen to any of that nonsense about the end of love. This was a cold, calculated business decision. It was a risk management strategy for $130 billion in assets. When the official statement uses the phrase shared values as a piece of propaganda, it only proves that those shared values had long since disappeared. The phrase unable to grow together really means, if I stay with you, my reputation will rot right alongside yours. A lot of people have sent me private messages asking about the real story behind their divorce. Today, I am laying out the details from the files for you. If you are also curious about the real power struggle behind this wealthy marriage, do not forget to subscribe to the channel. I post similar deep dive analysis every day. This is not gossip. This is a masterclass in how power and capital really operate in our era. Chapter 5. The Elite's Get Out of Jail Free Card. Who is protecting him? Now we come to the central question of this entire article. Why is a man so deeply connected to Jeffrey Epstein, a man who personally built a monopolistic empire, still sitting comfortably on his former world's richest man throne, tweeting, doing charity, and accepting media accolades? The answer is simple. He still holds that get-out-of-jail-free card. It is not that he is actually innocent. It is that the system is simply too afraid to touch him. Do you think American justice is fair? Wrong. It is a game of money dressed up in the robes of fairness. When a man has tens of billions of dollars, what can he buy? He can buy a team of the best lawyers in the country. He can buy the most powerful lobbyists on Capitol Hill to speak for him. He can buy the most influential media outlets to write 360-degree public relations whitewashes of his reputation. With that kind of setup, it is very, very hard for any accusation to truly hurt him. The Epstein Files mention a long list of famous names connected to that Lolita Express plane. But the only people who were actually charged, convicted, and made to pay a price were the low-level facilitators who did not have money or power. The big names behind them either denied everything, stayed silent, or had their legal teams delay any possible prosecution until the public simply forgot. Gates has faced no meaningful legal consequences whatsoever. He does not even need to do anything. Behind him stands a whole system of elite protection ready to shield him. When a journalist wants to break a scandal about him, the editor might think, this man's foundation gives us so much money every year. Should I trade this story for that money? When a politician wants to investigate him, his lobbying team might gently remind them, do not forget, we are still cooperating with your state on several major health infrastructure projects. This is the modern version of monarchy. Only the crown and scepter have been replaced by the stock market and corporate boards. You do not necessarily have to put your opponent in jail to win. You just have to make everyone feel like it is too much trouble to go after him. Is everyone truly equal before the law? Or can rich people indeed buy their own innocence? Type your answer in the comments. I want to hear your position. Every day, thousands of ordinary Americans get 10-year prison sentences for possessing a few grams of drugs. Meanwhile, a billionaire, even after being caught in the same room as the world's most notorious sex offender, can still stand on the podium at the World Health Organization and declare that he is saving humanity. This is not irony. This is the naked truth running wild in the streets. Final summary and reflection. The collapse of Bill Gates' public persona is not just about one man's lies falling apart. It is not just the tabloid drama of a billionaire's divorce. It is a systemic failure of our entire modern mechanism of idol worship. It is the final, killing blow to a collective hallucination that we humans have participated in for far too long. The most important lesson we can learn from all of this is that there is never an equal sign between business success and moral purity. A man can be a brilliant programmer, a ruthless monopolist, a savvy philanthropist, and also a person with terrible judgment, a love of privilege, and a willingness to stand next to evil. All of these identities can live without contradiction inside the same human body. Our biggest mistake was putting these people on their pedestals ourselves, using our own worship to shield their wrongdoing in our minds. In this era of collapsing idols, real progress does not come from blindly believing in some perfect, flawless saint. Progress comes from each of us stubbornly pursuing the truth and constantly examining the exercise of power. We do not need imaginary gods wrapped in money and media narratives. We need real people, people who are willing to admit their imperfections and accept public scrutiny. If you have read this far, it means you still have the most basic curiosity and vigilance about this world. You have not been completely numbed by those beautifully packaged biographies. If you think this article has revealed truths you never heard before, or if it has confirmed a suspicion you always held deep down but never dared to voice, please hit the like button and share it. Let more people who are still blinded by the myth wake up. Worship the truth. Worship logic. Worship those honest people who are willing to be questioned in the light of day. As for those saints sitting on their clouds, holding their foundation reports, let them come back down to earth and submit themselves, like the rest of us, to the undiscriminating scrutiny of the rules of this world. That is what it truly means to be clear-headed.